Hi friends, it's Shari. Today I have 3 summertime build a cake cards to share with you, and I really am excited to share these with you. I love how they turned out. So the first one I'm going to start with is my Patriotic cake, and you can see I have the build a cake dies there on the right. I've already cut out some of my pieces, but on this cake what I want to do is trim this into 3 sections using this die that cuts the large cake into threes and make a red, white, and blue cake. Now this cake is red, white, and blue, but you could change this to any 3 colors that you want. And you're going to see that this is really fun. We're going to make some firecrackers for the top of it. So what I'm doing is I'm spacing out that die that just cuts the 2 lines to split my cake into 3. And I'm trying to space it so that I get 3 even pieces with the topper on the top and the piping along the bottom. So once I have that in a good place where I think I'm going to get 3 equal pieces, I'm going to run that through my die cut machine. Now, the trick to this is to cut the blue and the red in the exact same spot, which might seem like it might be hard to do, but it's not going to be hard to do. I'm going to show you exactly how we're going to do it. So I've cut my blue and my red. This is some textured canvas cardstock. I'm taking that lower layer that's white. Then I'm going to take the die that cuts the 2 lines and just snug it right up against that layer. And then when I cut it, I know I've cut it in the same place. Now for my blue, I only need the top, so I only used a piece of blue, but the same idea here. We're going to put that top piece here, snug this right up against the edge of that white one, pull it out, and then run it through our die cut machine. And now our blue one matches, and we can mix and match our layers and have our different cakes. And all those colors of cardstock are cut the same. Now you could just cut all of these from white, color them with markers, or ink them, but I wanted to show you how to do it with different colors of cardstock or paper. Now for my center layer here, I'm using that little sprinkles die, and I'm going to cut out some sprinkles and carefully remove the die. Now we have all these little openings, and I'm going to layer some glitter behind that, so some silver glitter. So I've just cut a piece of silver sparkle cardstock, and I'm taking that same die that cut our layers of our cake, and I am going to cut me a layer of silver. Now this one doesn't matter so much about placement because we're just using the piece that's between the 2 cuts, and we're going to layer that right behind the white. I also cut another solid cake, and I'm putting adhesive all over it so that I can assemble these pieces together. So I'm starting with the red at the bottom. Then before I put my silver glitter on there, I'm going to take some liquid glue, add some dots on the back of this white piece where I cut out all those little sprinkle holes, and layer these 2 together. And I'm definitely using liquid glue on this because I am gluing to that kind of rougher glitter surface of the paper. Then I can add that to my solid cake, and then finally the blue piece on top. Now I did cut a topper for this. This is cut from some Blue Jay cardstock, so we have a darker blue. And then for the plate on this one, I used the holographic cardstock. This is the one that looks like a disco ball to me with those squares, and it really stands out. You're going to see when I pick up my final card and move it around, this really catches your eye, and I love how it looks. For the little piping at the bottom, I used that same silver glitter cardstock. And now I'm moving on to my candles, or in this case, we're going to make them into firecrackers. I have 1 tall one and 2 short ones, and I'm using the little lines that the die creates as a guide to color my candles and make them look striped. Now, something I didn't do in the video, but I did afterwards, is when I finished my card, I actually added some stickles to the white stripes, which I thought made it look even more cohesive instead of just having that coloring. Now I have another piece of that holographic cardstock that looks like a disco ball, and I cut the 3 largest stars from the sequin mix die, and I am going to layer these right on top of the flame of the candle to create my firecrackers. So I've just put a little bit of liquid glue on each of those, and I'm dropping that star in place. And for these, I actually didn't even poke out the little hole that's in the middle of the sequin. I just left it in there because I'm just gluing the whole thing onto that candle flame. So these are really cute, but I want to add some more wow to them and make them really look like firecrackers. So I've pulled out the smallest of the hot foil fireworks plates, and my platform is all nice and heated up. It's ready to go. I'm going to put my red foil with the pretty side down, some pink pearlescent vellum with the pretty side down, and then my two plates, and I'm going to run this through my die cut machine. And you're going to see here when I pull it out, it has pressed that hot foil into that vellum. Now these also have coordinating dies, so I can cut this little foil firework out, and then these are going to layer behind the stars and really make them pop. So I'm going to do the same thing. I made two red ones and one blue one, and I've already cut those out and foiled them. I'm adding a little dot of glue to the center, and that is exactly where my star is going to go. And these turned out so fun. I think this would be fun to do with some other candles in maybe like rainbow colors. I think that would be fun. So I'm adding these to the top of my cake. I'm putting the tall one in the center, and then I will put each of those shorter ones on each side. And I'm just tucking the firework part behind the one in the center. So that one in the center is kind of standing out just a little bit more. I love how this looks. I also have some little stars cut from that silver sparkle cardstock. I was going to use these on the candles initially, but the biggest star is a little too small and the sequin stars just were a better size. So I decided to use these as my embellishments on my cake, and I'm just sprinkling those around and picking them up and adding them with a little dot of glue. It just makes this cake look even more festive. So now I need to work on the background part of this card, and I am pulling out that light blue hatching pattern from Bitsy Blooms because I don't want to distract from my cake too much, but I'm also going to use this Candy Cane Lane paper. This is the one that is red and pink stripes with that little gold foil stripe, and I'm just going to use it as an accent down the sides of my card. So I've cut it into 1 inch by 5.5, and then this panel is 5.5 by 3 3/4. And I will add my little stripes to the side first. This is on my card base. And then I can add my Bitsy Blooms panel right to the center. And you can see we get this really fun border of that stripe down both sides, which goes perfectly with our cake. Now these were kind of hanging off the end a little bit. They weren't quite even, so I'm just going to trim that off. And now everything is nice and even and pretty. Now for the sentiment on this cake, I'm using Let's Celebrate from the Henry's Build a Sentiment birthday stamp set. I've cut a little stitched banner from some moonstone cardstock, and I'm actually going to do a little bit of embossing. So I was prepping that with my anti-static powder tool. I'm going to stamp this on the right side using some VersaFine ink. This is black and it's kind of sticky. It is a pigment ink. And then I used clear embossing powder, and I'm just heating that up so I get a shiny sentiment. Now I want this to look like it is a little banner stuck into the cake. So I have a toothpick here that I just grabbed out of my kitchen. I'm wrapping the other end of that banner around that toothpick to kind of figure out where the fold is. Then I will use some liquid glue on the back and in that little crease there where my toothpick's going to go. And I want it to kind of go past the top edge of the banner a little bit so we see that toothpick. And then I'll just let this dry, and we're going to add this to our card. So I've put foam adhesive all over the back of the cake, just putting one little square behind the stars on the vellum. I'll put my cake right on here, and I also have some foam squares on the back of this little banner as well. And I'm just tucking the end of the toothpick behind the cake. So I'm not even gluing that toothpick down. This is just held in place with the foam behind the banner. And then I've pulled out a couple more of those little stars to just kind of sprinkle around. And then here is that finished festive patriotic card. And as I said before, I did add some glitter to the white stripes of the candles a little bit later, but it just turned out so cool. And I love that holographic cardstock. Now I'm moving on to the second summertime cake that I've designed, and this one is a beach themed cake. So I'm adding in the stitched seashells and some of the dies from the platform pop-up wave wrap around. And you can see I've already cut all of my pieces out here. On this cake, we are going to do some inking on our die cut pieces. So I cut the cake from Mermaid and the top from Craft, and then I used some spiffier speckles for my shells and a couple of the little seaweeds. And then I used a variety of greens for the other ones, and we're going to talk about that as I put this together. Now for my cake, I wanted an under the water ombre oceany look. I have some mermaid ink here that I started out with, but I realized this was way too light on the mermaid cardstock and it wasn't going to give me the look I needed. But no worries, I had already pulled out the peacock ink, which is going to give me exactly the look I'm going for. Now I'm stopping short of the top so that I have the lightest part at the top and it's going to peek out from under that craft piece. And now I'm pulling in Forget Me Not, and this is just a perfect blue, I think, to really make this look like an ocean. So I'm adding that at the bottom, and that's looking pretty good there. So I always want to add some texture to water for whatever reason because it's not perfect. And I'm adding some white metallic splatters, and I really love these because it makes it shimmer, and to me that's exactly what water does, whether it be an ocean or a river or a stream, it shimmers in the sunlight. Now for the top, it's looking pretty plain after we've inked the bottom of our cake. So this sand ganache needs a little bit of inking to it. So I've added dough ink, just a tad of walnut ink, and now I'm adding some watercolor. So this is some dark brown watercolor to add that sandy texture. And when I'm doing sand, I always like to add some white splatters as well. So some small white splatters, and this looks just like the sand of the beach to me. So I'll set that aside to dry. And once these pieces are dry, I'm ready to assemble my cake. And you can tell just from this inking, this really changed the look of these die cut cardstock pieces. So I'm adding that sandy ganache to the top of the cake. For the plate, I just cut this from some narwhal cardstock to kind of look like a rock, but it was awfully plain. So I'm pulling in some gray ink and just kind of tapping it with that ink to kind of ink it up a little bit and make it not look so perfect. And now it seems to match my cake a little bit better. I'm going to do the same thing for the shells. This is just going to give them some definition, to give them some shading across the bottom. So I'm using Peachy Keen on this peachy colored shell and Fresh Lavender along the bottom of the purple shell. And this just really brings those die cuts to life just a little bit more. Now I'm going to put one shell at the bottom and one shell at the top, but I also need to decorate around it with all these fun seaweed pieces. So I'm just trying to figure out kind of what I want to do, and then I will start putting these together. And I just think it's really fun to add all these seaweeds peeking out from behind the shells, especially using some different colors. Now this is peacock, that one I just picked up. And when I laid it there, it didn't really stand out like I wanted it to, but you're going to see me fix that here in just a minute. So I have the green ones are cut from algae cardstock and then also a lighter green from the textured canvas pack. And let's fix this one. I'm taking some rainforest ink, getting it really inky and just tapping it all over that die cut. So if you don't have a color that works in the cardstock, think about changing the color using some ink. So now I have a really dark teal seaweed, and that's really going to stand out on my cake a lot more than the other one. For the shell, I'm using some thin foam squares just to pop it up just slightly off the cake and give it a little more dimension. Now for my shell at the top, I need to kind of put these little seaweeds around. I did use the seaweed in the stitched seashells up here at the top because it's much bigger. That is cut from some peacock cardstock. Again, I have these little green ones, and this one I'm just gonna like rip it in half and get myself a little tiny one to tuck behind the shell. So I'm just gonna kind of create my little, let's just say, bouquet of seaweed and seashells before I put this whole thing on the top of the cake. I'll add that little one that I tore apart from that double piece, and then I will tuck in this little pink one. I like the pink or kind of orange just to kind of add a little more color to this sea life and to this cake. And then I'm going to take this whole thing and I'm going to add one of those little thin foam squares just to the bottom of the shell. So this whole thing is popped up just a little bit more. So now my cake is done and I need to work on the background, and I thought that this blue bokeh would be perfect because it looks like bubbles. So I've cut a lacy rectangle out of craft and I was just measuring the inside of it. You could use one of the small stitch rectangles to cut this out, but I just thought I would just trim it down with my trimmer because I didn't really want that stitch detail, but if you wanted it, you could. And then this is going to fit right inside my lacy rectangle, and that's going to create a nice kind of, let's just say, beachy frame because it's that same craft color as the sand on my cake. For my card base, I'm actually going with a cream colored card base. So this is a vanilla malt cardstock, and it's going to show through those little lacy details. Now I wanted to use this twine. This is the latte twine because to me it looks very nautical in that brown color, but I wasn't quite sure where I wanted my bow. So I'm tying a double bow. I've layered it twice, tying a bow, getting it the size I want, and I'm going to trim off the ends. And then I just kind of played around trying to figure out where I wanted it, and I couldn't decide. So I just sat it to the side for a minute and decided to move on to my sentiment that says make a splash. And this is from the Mermaid for You flip flop stamp set. And I'm just using my Misty to stamp that down after I got the placement with the cake. And now I can add my cake. I did decide that over here to the left, instead of covering up the shell, just kind of over here on the corner worked perfectly for this bow. So I'm just adding it with a little glue dot. Then I'm adding my foam squares all over the back. I did use the micro foam squares on the back of some of that seaweed, so it's nice and supported. And on the back of the shell, I actually doubled up. So it's a regular thickness foam square and a thin foam square because remember I did pop that shell up with a thin foam square onto the cake. And of course, we need some glitter because this is a sparkly, fun ocean card. So I'm adding unicorn glitter actually to the seaweed, and I will add it to that sandy ganache on the cake. This is much like the Stardust stickles, but it has a little bit more of that yellowy iridescent glitter in it. So it really catches the eye on these dark colors. So I really love how this summertime ocean themed cake turned out. I've had this idea since the dies showed up at my house, and I'm really glad I finally got to make this cake. Now on to the third cake for this video. This is going to be a rainbow cake, and I took this stripe die here that is meant to put like a stripe through the cake, and I cut out my entire rainbow out of that stripe die. This is going to make making a rainbow cake super duper easy. So I have the base of the cake, or the main part of the cake, cut from white. I'm starting at the bottom with some guava cardstock, and you can see I'm kind of putting this a little bit above the bottom so that the whole bottom stripe doesn't get covered up by that piping detail that I'm going to add to the bottom. Then I'm just working my way up, just snugging each of these little stripes up against the one below it. And I've got guava, fig tan, sunflower, cilantro, tide pool, a blue from the textured canvas pack, and then some sugar plum purple. Now for the little piping detail that's at the bottom, I just cut this from white. We have so much color on our cake. I wanted to keep these details much more neutral, so I'm just adding that to the bottom. But for the top, I did want that purple to continue on so that this whole cake was colorful, but I wanted it to be a little different, so I am using some sparkle cardstock. This is the grape sparkle cardstock. Now, I also have some little clouds. I'm going for a kind of rainy day, and then comes the rainbow theme. But when I started working on this, I forgot to turn my camera on. So these pieces are already glued down. Let's talk about them. I started by stamping the little umbrella from Hello Baby. I stamped this in some River Rock ink on white paper, and I used the coordinating die to cut it out. Then I also stamped it on some spiffy speckles paper, and then I just fussy cut just the part of the umbrella where I wanted the color, and then I glued the two together, and then I attached the clouds to the top of the cake. Now these clouds are from the spring showers die set, and that is also where the raindrops come from that I cut from the silver sparkle cardstock. So I just put the two clouds at the top. The little one is popped up with some thin foam squares, and then I added the 5 different sizes of raindrops. And then for the plate at the bottom, I did want it to stand out just a little bit from the white piping, so this is cut from fog cardstock. Okay, now that we're all caught up on the part where my camera was turned off, let's work on the background for this card. So I'm using the sunburst backdrop with some yellow spiffy speckles paper, and I'm just putting tape on the back to hold that circle in place. I'm not going to pull that circle out, I just want it to act like one backdrop. Now this looks pretty cute with that yellow, but I wanted to darken it up a little bit. So I have my sunflower ink and a blending brush, and I'm just going to go around all the edges. I really like doing this on backdrops like this. I think it makes the details that the backdrop cuts stand out a bit more. It makes the edges really pop, and it makes the center look like a focal point as that darker color kind of goes to the lighter color in the center. Now, of course, I want some shimmer to catch your eye on this backdrop too. So I'm using my gold metallic watercolors, and I'm actually going to add two different gold colors. So we've got a lot of yellow and gold going on. So I use that kind of red gold for some big splatters, and then I'm using this yellow gold for some smaller splatters. And I just think when you use two colors like this, it really gives a lot of dimension to your paper. So I will just set that aside to dry, and now I can work on my sentiment. And I have Henry's Build a Sentiment Spring, and I am spelling out the sentiment that says sending sunshine your way. And I'm sorry for the blurriness, I really had to get my head right over this one to get it nice and lined up. So I've cut this with a little banner, but I want it to be a little bit shorter, so I'm just lining that sentiment banner up again, and I'll trim off that little extra tail. So now my sentiment banner matches the width of my sentiment. Now that my splatters are all dry, I can add this to my card base. Then I will add my cake, again with some foam squares all over the back. And I'm just going to use my sentiment banner kind of as a guide. I want it just to barely touch the bottom of the cake stand. I did forget to put a foam square under that cake stand, so I'm just adding one carefully. And then for my sentiment, I like to flip it over like this so I can see where to put my squares. I know I need to avoid the center where it crosses that little cake stand. That's just an easy tip to make sure you don't have your foam in the wrong spot. And then I will just add a little dab of glue to the bottom of that to catch the center of the sentiment banner. And I'll just line this up right along the bottom. And I think this goes perfectly with that rainbow, sunshine, rainy day kind of themed cake. And of course, we need some stickles. And I just went on the clouds, the umbrella, and just a little bit on the top of that piping at the bottom to give it some glitter. I really love how this one turned out. I wanted to make a rainbow cake so badly, and I love that the stripe is a really easy way to do that versus trying to blend it or color it and make it perfect. So here are all 3 of my summertime build a cake cards. I have so many build a cake ideas in my head, but I really had to narrow it down, so I just did the summer themed ones. Hopefully I can share some more in the future. I would love for you to tell me which one's your favorite. I love all 3 of these, so it's really hard for me to decide. But I really hope this has inspired you to look at the Build a Cake die and think of all the amazing possibilities. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.